Hey, true crime fans, Dr. Cassidy here. Today we're going to be talking about a pretty interesting list that I came across that I think is just fascinating. You know, I've mentioned before that most of the research that we do, most of the information that we have are from events that happened years ago, and we're looking at things, hindsight. But there are actually quite a few active serial killers in the world today. And if you think about that, it's a little bit scary. Now, I've said often, and I need to look at the actual research on that. But there are definitely things that are happening in our world today that are decreasing the number of offenders. Crime is actually, decreasing. That's because we have that such advanced DNA. We also have the average American is on camera 30 times a day. So if you're out and about, the chances of you being on a camera are pretty good. And we all know, if you've watched any of those shows, that the police look for cameras all over the neighborhood, all down a highway, wherever. And sometimes that's exactly what solves a crime. So unless there's someone who really has I don't know what to call it. I guess someone who has just a sure-proof method to not get caught, can operate, invisibly, those kind of things, which happens. We know that. We know these things happen because that's how serial killers go for so long without being caught. But there is a news outlet. It's called the Crime Wire, and they have an article on the most dangerous active serial killers in the 2020s. This was released July the 14th of this year, and what this author found, Lawrence Lease is his name. He did find he created a pretty interesting list of active serial killers or events that are attributed to the same person, that are connected through their MO, right? But these are all but one. These are unsolved. And we'll talk about the one that is solved now when I get down to it on the list. Here's some background. On the whole, serial killers are on the decline, for the reasons that I just stated. There are fewer serial killers on the hunt since the dawn of the 21st century. If you're a true crime observer, you've probably noticed that the 80s were a high watermark for these murderous criminals, with nearly 770 active serial killers across the country. This is just the United States here. We're just talking about the United States. 770 active serial killers. Over time, there'll be more media outlets that cover more of these. So we'll get to know them. But again, you can sit down any given day, any time of the day, and there are 4 or 5 different true crime shows on. And not all of them are serial killers, but a lot of them are. So eventually, I think the majority are going to turn into a news story, or an entertainment story, especially with us being an information age, right? That number 770, it dropped in the 90s and the 2000s. And in 2016, there were only 100 known active serial killers. Well, that's a tremendous drop, but it's still not good. We only have 50 states, Puerto Rico, 51 if you want to count that, and that would mean average two per state. A little bit scary. But again, that's why we have to be smart with our surroundings. We have to pay attention to our children, pay attention to the environments that they're in. All of these professionals who have investigated these crimes and who understand, how these people were chosen as victims, we need to listen to them. What is it that they were doing that caused them to become a target? Many cases, it was nothing that they did in particular. Maybe they were just literally walking down the street. But if you're walking down the street at 3 o'clock in the morning with no cell phone and no coat on, and you look homeless or like you're not, like you don't have a purpose or anything, you're a victim. You can be a victim very easily. So you have to be smart about it. So there are many opinions as to why there's a decline, and some of them are investigative advances and forensic science, which we talked about, and which have increased the chances of offenders getting caught. Also, with technological innovations and the heightened connectivity between parents and children, killers have a harder time hiding their tracks and isolating potential victims. Although cyber predators use the internet for their own nefarious means. Now, we have not talked about cyber predators, and there's a reason for that. Cyber predators, there is not a connection between cyber predators and serial killers at this time. And that's because most of the criminal aspect of this is typically this predator gaining pornography, grooming the children, and then, in extreme cases, having them meet them or parking down from their house and talking them into escaping the house for the night and then never seeing them again. So those are the kind of things that cyber predators do, not too unlike serial killers. But serial killers are on the ground. You rarely hear or see any evidence that they're using a cell phone or any other means besides perhaps them scoping out a victim and watching them for weeks and weeks, learning their schedule, learning their family's schedule so that they know when they're going to be alone, those kind of things. And that's common. I've had a couple of stalkers. It's pretty common. A lot of people, many people have, and they do pay attention to your work schedule. They pay attention to what you drive, where you go, the places that you frequent most often, and they look for opportunities when you're at your most vulnerable. So those are things that, for us to be safe, or as safe as possible against these kind of crimes, we just have to be aware and smart. We really do. I rarely go anywhere by myself. Kevin is with me most often, unless I'm with my friends or my mom. That's different. But for the vast majority of things I'm doing out and about, Kevin is with me, and there's reasons for that. It's we live in a town where it has a tremendous drug scene, and it's dangerous, and there are a lot of homeless people. There are homeless people who will attack you if you don't give them money. That was a huge problem last year when we would go to the grocery store at Aldi's. It was on the news and we actually got an email from the Shawnee State University police department that said, not to go to Kroger after dark by yourself, not to go to Aldi's after dark by yourself, and if you did go during the day, to be very cautious of your surroundings, because people were being attacked or bullied or threatened by these people. So there are things that happen in our community and all around the world, really, that we just have to be smart about. I do not go to the grocery store by myself. We always go together. The rare exception to that would be if I'm getting off work and I just go run grab a gallon of milk or something. But for us, our grocery days, we do them together. Not only because we enjoy doing it together, but because it's safer. So, what we see in a lot of these cases is that abuse victims grow up with the potential to become serial killers, and maybe they're receiving psychiatric help at an early age through mental health services, and that may be a reason for the decrease. It doesn't mean that there are no serial killers out there, of course. It just means that there are hundreds of new ones, while older perpetrators who managed to elude capture may have gone into hiding. If you remember BTK did not, he went dormant, if you will, for I think 10 years, maybe 13, before he struck again. And that was mainly because he had a family. He had young children. He was a pillar in the community. Remember, he was the president of the church association. That's how they got him, was him using the church computers for his, nefarious acts. So just because they go dormant doesn't mean that there's not a time when they'll come back. And we see that very often. All of these on this list are cases like this, right? There are a few who are still walking free. The I-70 killer, that happened in 1992 between April 8th and May the 7th, so very short amount of time, not even a month. And 6 people were found murdered along I-70, and the murders happened between Indiana and Kansas. It was reported that 5 were women and all were brunettes, which, of course, tells us that this person's MO was female and brunette. I'm going to say, more than likely, his mother or another female mother figure in his life was a brunette. And they targeted brunettes because they were acting out what they wanted to do to that person who perhaps abused them, misused them, whatever. That is typically how you start building, the profile of a murderer. So they know all these things. This tiny little bit of information here gives us a ton of information about the person who did these killings. It was believed that the 6th victim was mistaken for a woman when the killer saw the man's ponytail. So there was a man with a ponytail, obviously, and we don't know. That's what we think, but we'll probably never know for sure if he had a male that he murdered, or maybe just took credit for it. They do that a lot as well. All of the victims were employees of stores along I-70. Each was killed with a .22 caliber bullet, which of course adds to that MO. They use the same weapon. They use the same caliber bullet. They use ligatures. They use rope as the ligature. Whatever they do, and it's consistent. That's how we determine this looks like a serial killer. It's the same. This is another brunette. This is someone who used a .22 caliber bullet, which is what all the other women were killed with. That's how they bring it all together. And the locations, of course. Wichita police described the gun as a remake of a German Navy pistol, which is going to be not rare per se, but unusual for someone to have and use like that. So, I mean, we have guns. I grew up and I think I've talked about this before, I grew up in a household in an area where hunting is life. Everybody hunts. Everybody has guns. I'm making a general statement. Not everyone does, but in my family, everyone has guns. Multiple guns, not just one. We all have a gun.